This week on The Watchman, it's our 100th episode, and we're in Jerusalem with one of Israel's most respected authorities on Middle East and world affairs, Ambassador Dore Gold, who has a wake-up call for the West.
Iran was prepared to engage in a mass casualty attack in the capital of the U.S. Some country that is doing something like that is saying very clearly in black and white, I am your enemy.
Plus, we get an update on an American Christian pastor who's been unjustly imprisoned in Turkey because of his faith. We also hear the inspiring story of how Israelis are blessing their neighbors in war-torn Syria. It's the 100th episode of The Watchman, only with Christians United for Israel and only on TBN. And welcome to The Watchman. It's hard to believe, but this is the 100th episode of The Watchman Show right here on TBN. Folks, our team at Christians United for Israel is so blessed to be with you exclusively here every week on TBN, bringing you the truth about Israel, how God is moving in His land, and why it all matters to you. Since the show debuted back in February 2016, we've seen several history-making events unfold. Think about it. Against all odds, Donald Trump became the 45th President of the United States, and he not only moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, where it belongs, he also pulled America out of that disastrous Iran nuclear deal. But that's not all. We saw the 50-year anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem, and this year, 2018, we marked the 70-year anniversary of Israel's miraculous rebirth as a nation. Wow. If that's what's gone down during our first 100 episodes, I can't wait to see what God has in store for our next 100. In the meantime, our movement at Christians United for Israel has grown to 4.2 million members, making us America's largest pro-Israel organization. God has raised Kufai up. He's raised The Watchman up and joined us with TBN for such a time as this. Folks, we live in Bible times. We live in prophetic times. And what a time to bring this show to you every week. Now, we don't have a cake here with 100 candles to mark this milestone episode, but we do have something far better. Ambassador Dore Gold is Israel's former ambassador to the UN and has served as a top official at Israel's foreign ministry. He's also advised Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and currently heads up the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. I sat down with him recently in Jerusalem to learn more about the apocalyptic ideology that drives the Iranian regime and why pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal is a game changer for the United States. Take a look. We had the announcement by President Trump that the United States is pulling out of that disastrous Iran nuclear deal. Talk about how this agreement was dangerous, not just for Israel, of course, where Iran poses an existential threat to the Jewish state. This was dangerous for the world, including the United States. It was refreshing to see President Trump lay that out.
When Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went to Congress a few years back when the agreement was being negotiated, and he rallied against it, I didn't see him going there just to defend the state of Israel. I saw him defending the whole Middle East. He could have said, we, the peoples of the Middle East, have a problem with this agreement. And frankly, because he's so articulate and because he had such a very clear view of the problems, he was the man to come forward, not the king of Saudi Arabia, not the president of Egypt. It was him. But he wasn't just doing it for us. He was doing it for all the countries here. Now, in terms of the United States, people don't recognize this, but Iran has been at war with America, basically ever since 1979. But there's one incident that caught my eye, and that's in 1983, when the U.S. Marine Corps barracks were bombed in Beirut. the U.S. actually had information that was classified, was later disclosed, that the orders for killing the Marines didn't come from Beirut. They didn't come from Lebanon. There had been a signal sent from Tehran to Damascus, where Iran had an embassy, and from Damascus onward to Baalbek, where the Revolutionary Guards were deployed, and finally to Beirut. And the message was, kill the Marines. This was an order given by the highest levels in the Iranian regime. That was one of many indiscretions, putting it mildly, that Iran was involved in. And Americans died, Europeans died, Israelis died. And they continued to lead the struggle. They continued to lead the cause of terror in the world. You know, people also forget that even more recently, former Attorney General Eric Holder held a press conference in Washington announcing that the United States had just nabbed an Iranian who was involved in trying to recruit in Mexico a Mexican drug cartel to carry out a terror operation in Washington, D.C.
Targeting the Israeli and Saudi embassies.
Well, first and foremost, the Saudi Arabian ambassador who goes to have lunch in a certain prestigious Washington, D.C. restaurant full of U.S. congressmen, and he wanted to have a mass casualty attack there. Now, the Iranian agent just made one mistake. He wasn't speaking actually to a member of the drug cartels as he had thought. He was actually speaking to an agent of the DEA. And therefore he got caught. And the U.S. had him. But what did that show? That showed that Iran was prepared to engage in a mass casualty attack in the capital of the U.S. Some country that is doing something like that is saying very clearly, in black and white, I am your enemy, and if I have the capacity to attack you, I will. And that comes after, being involved in the killing of Americans in Iraq repeatedly. That comes after being involved in threats to America around the world.
I think a key point, Ambassador, is the Iranian ideology. A central pillar of that ideology is death to America, calling America the Great Satan. Could you talk about how that anti-Americanism is a central part of the Iranian regime's ideology, which they shape policy around?
The Iranians want to dominate, first of all, Iran, and then the Middle East, and then the world. The Iranians regard their supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as the leader of all Muslims in the world, from Malaysia to Morocco. They're afraid that, young people in Tehran, all they want to do is go to Disneyland. All they want to do is share in the America that you and I are familiar with. And in order to neutralize that attraction, they have to fight America. That's what they're all about.
Okay, the Iran deal is no more, at least from an American perspective. A lot of people in the U.S. are saying, well, we pulled out now, what comes next? What does come next? It's encouraging, obviously, that sanctions will be ramped up against Iran. Where do you think this is heading?
I was an Israeli ambassador to the UN, and I dealt with the UN resolutions dealing with Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. At least then, the first Bush administration made the removal of Iraqi missiles beyond a range of 150 kilometers a necessity, a requirement. But suddenly, a couple years later, Iran, it's all forgotten about. So you got to fix that. That can be fixed in a new agreement in the future. This idea that a disarmament agreement is like a carton of milk, that, after a certain period of time, it expires. The milk goes sour. Well, you can't do that. This isn't the kitchen program. This is about the security of the United States, the security of Europe, the security of the West. any future agreement, if you put a limitation on Iran, that limitation should last forever. But you're going to have to renegotiate all of this.
Thanks again to Ambassador Dore Gold for joining us, and be sure to check out his team's great work at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Well, coming up after the break, a major issue that we've drawn attention to here on the show is Christian persecution. And right now, an American Christian pastor, a U.S. citizen, is languishing in a Turkish prison for his faith. Folks, this is a very important story. Don't move.
Israel's amazing story of restoration, blessing, and divine protection during the last 70 years is proof that God's covenant with the Jewish people and the land of Israel is unbreakable. In 1948, God fulfilled His promise to restore the land of Israel to the Jewish people. For 70 years, Israel has shocked the world as it has survived endless wars and terror attacks and yet remained hopeful, successful, and compassionate. This year, please join CUFI in celebrating Israel at 70 and supporting the one and only Jewish state. Christians United for Israel created this Israel at 70 pin to honor the Jewish state's 7 decades of miraculous modern rebirth. Thank you for enabling CUFI to amplify your voice. Call Christians United for Israel at 210-477-4714 or go to kufi.org/watchman to receive your free Israel at 70 pin.
And welcome back. Andrew Brunson. That's a name you need to know. He's an American Christian pastor, a U.S. citizen, who right now is suffering in a Turkish prison because of his faith. 66 U.S. senators and at least 100 European parliamentarians have written a letter to the Turkish President Erdogan demanding Pastor Brunson's release. But so far, Erdogan, who's been tightening his grip on power and pushing Turkey in an increasingly radical direction, has refused to budge. To get an update on this situation, we sat down in Jerusalem with Michael Karam. Michael is a personal friend of Pastor Brunson who consults with Middle East NGOs and has worked in Turkey for over 25 years. Take a look.
To understand the situation that Andrew is in right now, you really have to go back to the events of July in 2016 and the coup d'etat and the attempted coup in Turkey, thwarted by Erdogan or stopped by Erdogan and the people. After the coup, there was a military crackdown, state of emergency imposed, and basically a big roundup started of all the potential collaborators with the coup. In their eyes, it was the work of Fethullah Gulen and his religious group, the Servants Group, that was behind. Now, Fethullah Gulen is in exile in the United States, as most people know. He was basically accused of masterminding the coup. So it went from first the Fethullah Gulen and his group, and then it went to any kind of Kurdish or opposition groups within the government were then accused of aiding or collaborating in the coup attempt. So Andrew was sort of caught in the middle of that roundup of different people. He himself was picked up in October 2016. In the beginning, the conditions of his imprisonment were different than what they turned out to be. He was moved then to a high security prison shortly after his wife was released after about a month imprisonment, and then he was moved to a high security prison where he was placed in an overcrowded cell with about 18 different people. The United States government got involved. Vice President Pence, President Trump even brought the subject up on numerous occasions. In fact, from what I've read, every single time he's gotten together, he's met with Turkish officials, whether the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, or even President Erdogan himself, he has brought up Andrew Brunson's case.
You know, we have Pastor Brunson, a wonderful Christian pastor, and he's right now in Turkey. He's been there a long time, and they say he's a spy, but he's not a spy. And we're going to all work, and we've been working for his release. He's having a hard time. There's a trial going on, but the trial is not so much of a trial. And we're talking to the folks in Turkey about doing something about it. But Pastor Brunson, I hope you can hear us, will be helping you at some point. We've been working on it for a while. It's been there a long time, and he's a totally innocent man.
President Erdogan actually came out after being confronted or being spoken to by U.S. officials about his situation, saying, look, you have our pastor, meaning Fethullah Gulen, who's in exile in the United States, who's wanted to be deported back to Turkey. We have your pastor. If you want your pastor back, then you're going to have to give us our pastor. So at this point, it became very clear that he was being held as a political hostage. And those charges are serious because they involve a law on the Turkish books, a law on the Turkish government that basically says that dividing the unity of the state is a serious crime that will potentially up to life imprisonment. Right now, his particular charges would involve 35 years in prison. In the court cases that have taken place, and now there's been two, one in mid-April and one at May 7th, Andrew was not even able to bring any kind of witnesses on his behalf into the courtroom. He was only able to answer himself the accusations that were brought against him. And basically one of the main accusations that was brought against him was that his work as a Christian pastor and preaching the gospel was actually illegal, which doesn't make any sense because there's freedom of religion in the Turkish constitution for people to exercise their own faith. So the conditions that you can imagine can be very harsh, especially for a foreigner. You're alone, you're cut off from your family, you're cut off from your friends, you have no communication with the outside world. You're allowed one visit a week by your wife, and he basically has felt like there's a strong possibility that he might not be able to see or be with his family again. He's 50 years old right now. He's been in there 18 months. 35 years is basically a life sentence for him. This now has caught the attention of the nation and other nations around because Andrew is an evangelical pastor and the evangelical community worldwide is watching this case. They want to see what's going to happen. This is a man that brought his family, that was committed to serving the Turkish and Kurdish people, who gave his life, who had no political connections at all. He was a pastor. He was there because he loved the nation of Turkey and loved the people of Turkey, and now he's in prison. So we need to pray for him.
Thanks again to Michael Karam for that very important update. Folks, be sure to keep Pastor Andrew Brunson and his family in your prayers. Well, coming up next, you won't see it in the mainstream media, but we will bring it to you here on The Watchman. The story of Israelis banding together to help their Arab Muslim neighbors who've been affected by that brutal Syrian civil war. It's powerful stuff. Stick around.
The Christians United for Israel Washington, D.C. Summit is our most powerful tool to impact U.S. foreign policy towards Israel. And every year, we rely on thousands of Christians like you showing up in D.C. to use your influence. This year, we'll join forces in the nation's capital to show America's policymakers that the Jewish state has our wholehearted support. Pro-Israel champions like special guest speakers Ambassador Nikki Haley, Israel's Ambassador Ron Dermer, nationally syndicated radio host Dennis Prager, and Fox News host Laura Ingraham will be there. And we need you to be there too. Please join CUFI's founder Pastor John Hagee and the Watchman's Erick Stakelbeck for the most important pro-Israel event of the year. Your voice is powerful. Your presence in D.C. is irreplaceable. Help us celebrate Israel's 70th birthday by making the Jewish state stronger and her people safer.
And welcome back to the 100th episode of The Watchman Show right here on TBN. Folks, the Syrian civil war is the world's bloodiest conflict. Over 400,000 people have been killed, many of them women and children, right next door to Israel. And a little-known story is that Israelis are helping wounded and displaced Syrians every day. One of those Israeli organizations is called Just Beyond Our Borders. CUFI's Israel Collective captured the story of this amazing movement and how Israelis are helping their Arab Muslim neighbors. Take a look.
I care about Syria because it's about people. It's all started here in this balcony in the last Yom Kippur. We did prayers in 5 places around Israel for the sake of the kids in Syria. We called our campaign Just Beyond Our Borders. It was one of the biggest crowdfunding campaigns that were ever happened in Israel. This campaign focused on kids and babies in Syria. We finished this campaign after 30 days with 1,300,000 shekels. We are buying a humanitarian and medical aid. People felt that they must do something, and we gave them the way to do so. This is what this campaign is about. It's about people to people, because we're Jewish, and this is who the Jewish are. We believe that all people around the world born in the hands of God, we all equal in front of God. My grandmother is a Holocaust survivor, and you know, the history of the Jewish people taught us that when people stay silent to those crazy things that are happening around the world, very bad things could happen. And the Holocaust is one of the worst, if not the worst, example for it. And I couldn't be silent about it. If the situation would be the opposite, I believe that the world would have doing something. If you ask me about Syrians, it's a good question, I don't know. But actually, to be frank, I don't care. I don't care because I don't do it because I want to get a favor back. I do it because I believe in it. This is how I believe that the world should run. And it doesn't matter if they do so too or not. For me, I cannot suffer a situation that few hundred kilometers from our borders, there's people that live like this. And it doesn't matter what will happen in reverse. Israelis, they have a great heart. When you put them in a test of something to do, they are doing it. This is what Israel is about. Jerusalem, this is the place to start fixing the world, because this is like the city that God chose as his capital. The most exciting part of this were when we started to get SMSs and WhatsApp messages from the Syrian people. Taking care of those babies, it was amazing. It was so exciting to see those people happy, smiling, and saying thanks for us. They saw that we are there for them as persons, as peoples. For me, it's enough. For me, this is what we came here to do.
Man, what an amazing story. It's the kind of story you aren't seeing in the mainstream media. Be sure to check out more great videos like this one from Kufai's Israel Collective. You see the info there on your screen. Check them out. Well, up next, we share some of the highlights from the first 100 episodes of The Watchman Show. 100 down, and we're just getting started. Stick around.
In recent days, Hamas terrorists, backed by Iran, have incited attacks against Israeli security forces and infrastructure. It is outrageous for the Security Council to fail to condemn Hamas rocket attacks against Israeli civilians, while the Human Rights Council approves sending a team to investigate Israeli actions taken in self-defense.
Ambassador Nikki Haley has turned the United Nations upside down with her unpopular stand for truth.
I will not shut up. Rather, I will respectfully speak some hard truths.
Join Nikki Haley in Washington, D.C. on July 23rd and 24th as she speaks at our Night to Honor Israel. Show her your support. Register now for just $75 using the discount code WATCHMAN as Christians United for Israel tells the world we will not shut up.
And welcome back to The Watchman here on TBN. We are wrapping up our 100th episode here on TBN, and when I look back at these past 2.5 years, I'm in awe of what God has done. Here's some of the highlights.
The embassy will move. It's not if, but when. And I am convinced that during his term, the United States will recognize Jerusalem as the undivided and eternal capital of the State of Israel.
Where we're standing now, the city of David, if David was in Jerusalem, as the Bible says, some 3,000 years ago, this is where he would have been ruling from.
We are standing in the area where all the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Cave 1 and 2 are actually behind you, and cave number 3 is there in the distance.
We're saying to the nations of the world, we stand with Israel, and we stand for their right to exist, and we're standing for their right to defend themselves, and we're standing for the right for their borders to be secure.
It's been one fun ride, and there is much more to come. Big thanks to Matt Crouch and the entire team at TBN, as well as Pastor John Hagee and our CUFI leadership for giving me the opportunity to bring this show to you every week. Special thanks also go to my great editor, Chris Velk, my Israel production team led by Zvi Landsman and Sar El Media, and a shout out to all the production folks who've helped us along the way in Washington, D.C. and San Antonio, Texas during these first 100 episodes. Above all, I thank the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for opening the doors and continuing to bless and expand the Watchman. And a big thanks, of course, to you, the viewer, for joining us right here on TBN every week. Now remember, our CUFI Washington, D.C. Summit is fast approaching on July 22nd to the 24th, so be sure to register right now and use that special Watchman discount that you see there on your screen to attend. I will see you there. In the meantime, until episode 101, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.